Mr. President, I ask that I be recognized for such time as I shall consume.
Without objection.
Mr. President, we're going to have a vote here shortly, and it's going to be one of the really major significant votes. First of all, I say that the occupier of the chair is very aware of the things that we've been doing in the committee called Environment and Public Works. I mean, most of the stuff we've been doing that is really meaningful, the highway bill, the chemical bill, and now the WRDA bill, are things that have to be done. Last week, I talked about the WRDA bill and why it's important to pass it now. Just take a look at some of the major news stories from the past few months. Earlier this summer, we saw algae wash up on the beaches of Florida. This is a problem that will have significant impact on the health of Floridians, and as well as negatively impacting Florida's biggest industry, tourism. The WRDA bill 2016 has a solution to the problem. We have a project that will fix Lake Okeechobee and prevent this problem in the future. You know, I know a little bit about this because a lot of people are not aware that in my state of Oklahoma, we have more miles of freshwater shoreline than any of the 50 states. Now, that's because most of them are man-made lakes, so you have a dam down here, lots of shoreline going around here. But nonetheless, I had a personal experience with what they call blue-green algae. I mean, you think you're on your deathbed when you're there. Well, this chart that we have behind me is Bloom, St. Lucie, Florida. It's a picture of an algae bloom caused by deteriorating water conditions. Not only are these blooms environmentally hazardous, but they also economically, they're debilitating to communities living along South Florida's, what they call the working coastline. Communities along the coast depend on clean, fresh water flows to drive tourism. Just weeks ago, we saw historic flooding by Baton Rouge, in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and we've seen communities destroyed and lives turned upside down. In this WRDA bill, there are two ongoing core projects that will prevent the damages we saw. WRDA 2016 directs the Corps to expedite the completion of these projects. The second chart is the Baton Rouge, Louisiana, the flooding. We can no longer use a fix as it fails approach in America's flood control. There's just too much on the line. I'm not just talking about economic loss. We're talking about devastating floods. We've all seen that or experienced that, and we're talking about loss of human life. So this is not an option. Last year, there were several collisions in the Houston Ship Channel. Due to a design deficiency, the channel is too narrow, and the Coast Guard has declared it to be a precautionary zone. Now, the Houston Ship Channel is collision from 2015 was really a serious one, and without this bill, the Navigation Safety Project to correct this problem won't move forward. Last week, I spoke about what we will lose if we don't pass this important legislation. We'll lose 29. There are 29 navigation, flood control, and environmental restoration projects. They're just not going to happen. There will be no new core reforms to let local sponsors improve infrastructure at their own expense. I'll talk about this in a minute because this is really significant. They're willing to spend their own money, and yet it's not a legal thing for them to do. We correct that. There will be no FEMA assistance to states to rehabilitate unsafe dams. There will be no reforms to help communities address clean water and safe drinking water infrastructure mandates. You know, this is something that those of us from rural states, in my state of Oklahoma, we have a lot of small communities, and there's nothing that horrifies them more when they have an unfunded mandate. They come along and they say, we're going to have to treat the water. It's going to cost $14 million. They don't have any access to that kind of money. And I suggest in Alaska, there are a lot of similar types of problems. So this really goes a long ways to correcting these unfunded mandates. I know when I was mayor of Tulsa, the biggest problem that we had was unfunded mandates. So anyway, we're addressing that. Without this bill, there will be no new assistance for innovative approaches to the clean water and the drinking water needs. And there will be no protection for coal utilities from runaway coal ash lawsuits. We'll be addressing this in recognizing that there's a great value to coal ash if properly used. These are not state problems or even regional problems, but what we have here is a bill that addresses problems faced by our nation as a whole. And to reiterate how important this bill is, I want to give a few more real-world examples to show how the problems we're facing now are affecting our citizens, the people who sent us here in Washington. This is what we're supposed to be doing here. The water resources part of this bill expands our economy and protects infrastructure and lives by authorizing new navigation, flood control, and ecosystem restoration projects, all based on a recommendation from the Corps of Engineers and a determination that the projects will provide significant national benefits. Now, the Corps has built 14,700 miles of levees that protect billions of dollars worth of infrastructure and homes. These are referred to as high-hazard dams or high-hazard levees. And that definition means that if something happens to one, people will die. It's not, not saying people will be hurt or something, they're going to die. And we have many examples of that. So the Corps projects that nearly $50 billion a year in damages. Many of these levees were built a long time ago, and some have failed just recently. The chart 4 is the Iowa levee breach. Well, I mean, if that didn't tell the story, the significance of this. This is a levee in Iowa that was overtopped and eventually breached by disastrous floodwaters. In many cases, levees like this one were constructed by the Army Corps of Engineers decades ago, but no longer meet the Corps' post-Katrina engineering and design guidelines. WRDA 2016 will end the bureaucratic nightmare local levee districts face by allowing them to increase the level of flood protection, most of the time at their own expense, when the Corps is rebuilding after a flood, something that they can't do now. Now let's look at the economic benefits of investing in our nation's port and inland waterway system. We need to invest in our ports and inland waterway system to keep the cost of goods low. If we don't do that, the cost of goods go up. And of course, we want to keep creating the good paying jobs. WRDA 2016 has a number of provisions that will ensure we grow the economy, increase our competitiveness in the global marketplace, and promote long-term prosperity. These provisions include important harbor deepening projects like Charleston, South Carolina, Port Everglades, Florida, and Brownsville, Texas. Now, take Charleston as an example. That they have a harbor that's a 45-foot harbor. Now that they have expanded the Panama Canal, and we have the boats going through that are called Panamax vessels, and that is the great big vessels. Yeah, This gives you an idea of the stuff that can be carried on that. The problem with the Panamax vessels is that it takes 50 to 51 feet for them to use in a harbor. Now, what happens to Charleston, South Carolina, if they have one of the big vessels coming through the Panama Canal, coming up to come into a harbor in the United States? They have to instead go to one of the harbors in the Caribbean and divide up the containers, a very, very expensive thing. So anyway, that's just one of several of the harbors that we're working at. Everyone knows that the Corps maintenance budget is stretched so thin that WRDA 2016 comes up with a new solution. This is a solution that we have in the bill that we'll be voting on. We'll have a major vote tonight. In the WRDA bill, we let local sponsors like ports either give money to the Corps to carry out the maintenance or themselves get in and start maintaining using their own dollars. And that's something you'd think that they could do now, but they can't. That's in this bill. That is the major thing that the ports were pushing for in this bill. All right, what about communities? I mentioned that in my state of Oklahoma, we have a lot of the rural towns that don't really have the resources to do a lot of these, to perform the mandates. And so the bill provides federal assistance to communities facing unaffordable EPA safe water and clean water mandates. WRDA 2016 targets these federal dollars to those who need it the most. I know that years ago when I was the mayor of Tulsa, that was the major concern that we had. And it's even more with the small communities. So we do it we have assistance for small disadvantaged communities with a priority for underserved communities that lack basic drinking water infrastructure, assistance for lead service line replacement with a priority for disadvantaged communities, assistance to address very costly sewer overflow systems. It's noteworthy to mention that all the spending in this bill is either subject to the Budget Control Act caps that govern annual appropriation bills or is fully offset. This is an introduction to economics. By passing the legislation and securing appropriate funding, we can improve economic opportunity for all of Americans. And this is a critical moment. We must get back to regular order, passing WRDA every 2 years. You know, we went through a period in 2007 where we didn't have a WRDA bill following that until 2014. 2014 is the last time we did it, and we decided then we were supposed to do it every 2 years, so starting with 2014, we're going to do it. And the best evidence of that is we're going to do it tonight. So we'll have the 2016 budget. Now, doing this will help us modernize our water transportation infrastructure and keep flood protection and environmental restoration needs around the country. Now, the process that we followed in this is very open. And I think one of the reasons we've been successful in our committee at doing the transportation bill, doing the chemical bill, and now this bill, is because we have it out in the open where everybody knows what's going on. They have time to look at it and decide what is the best things for their state. And so way back in September, I'm sorry, it was in December 9th, we sent this bill from the committee to all members of the Senate saying that we're going to do the WRDA bill and go ahead and start working on amendments. They did that, and then, of course, for the last few weeks, we've been talking about getting amendments down to the floor, and we've done that. So we brought a substitute amendment that was a result of that work to the full Senate on September 8th. That amendment included over 40 provisions that were added after the committee markup. And then finally, last week, I came to the floor and let all of you know that Senator Boxer and I needed to see your amendments by noon Friday. This is for the manager's amendment. And by noon Friday, we had amendments in, and we considered some 35 provisions. And we have addressed most of these, I think, to some degree, all of them. Now, those provisions are in the Inhofe Boxer amendment that we filed today and hope to get consent to adopt shortly after the cloture vote tonight. So this has been a very open and collegial process, and all members have had their concerns and priorities heard. We have done our best to address members' priorities, and after cloture this evening, we will continue to do our best to clear germane amendments until final passage this week. So I'm very excited that we're going to be able to get this done, and it's something that a lot of people sit back and they say, well, nothing ever gets done in Washington. Well, I have to say, in our committee, we get things done, and we're going to get this one done tonight. Anything else? Yeah, with that, okay, Mr. President, I have one request for committees to meet during today's session of the Senate. They have the approval of the majority and the minority leaders.
Duly noted.
With that, I suggest